of what I want to share with you is really, really hard, both to put into words and to do so in a way that makes sense. When we speak, we make it a point to talk about the high points of what we do, God's amazing provision and the lessons we learn along the way. And I certainly want to share some really kind of spectacular things this morning, but I also want to talk about survival and simply being overwhelmed by life, by death, and the pain of those around us. Sometimes people think that missionaries and pastors are these, have it all together people. They put us on a pedestal, and maybe they think we see God move more or in special ways. And you might be partially right. We do see God move in ways that a lot of people don't on a regular basis, and we have been part of seeing the miraculous and part of being the miraculous in people's lives. Over the last 26 years, Patty and I have built churches, remodeled churches, come alongside children's ministry, and we've shared the gospel with literally hundreds of thousands of people. We've fed up the hungry, and we've bound up the brokenhearted. But part of being a missionary or a pastor or any Christian leader is that we also come in contact with a lot more people than most. And because of the nature of our jobs, we hear about 10 times the volume of people's pain, much more so than their victories or even their gratitude. We're also fully human. Like the disciple Thomas, we doubt. I think I doubt maybe more so than Thomas a lot of times. But we're also like Jesus, not necessarily in the holy parts, but we're like Jesus when even he had that crisis moment where he looked up at the sky and said, God, why have you forsaken me? And sometimes we're like Peter when he denied Jesus 3 times. We forget about all the great things that Jesus has done, the different ways that he's moved in our lives, and we react based solely on our humanity. Sorry, I stumbled there because I was about to say solamente, but that was Spanish. And over the last couple of years, we've gone through it all. Panic, hope, relief, complacency. We've had a rude awakening that involved death, and then more deaths, and even a season of despair, before we finally found a place of rest and hope and living in God's promise. And this morning I want to tell part of that story. Now, I have absolutely no confidence that I'm going to tell it well. And I'm not even sure if I'm going to tell it coherently. So if I stumble a little bit, forgive me. But this morning, you all are going to be part of my emotional catharsis. Now, if you don't know what that term means, basically it says I'm going to dump all of my emotional junk on you. See, when COVID hit, we were in a pretty good place for the most part. We had just hosted the outreach teams you saw, and it was a really cool outreach team in that it was a mixture of people from 3 different churches. It was biracial, a lot of people from Jamaica, Africa, and yet it meshed and accomplished so much. And then me, a 300-plus pound dude, found myself doing women's ministry in 3 different cities for over 2 weeks, holding mass women's conferences, and just all of that was in one month, and it was spectacular. And then COVID hit, and for the first time ever, we had to cancel an outreach team, and then we had to cancel all of our outreach teams. And to give you an idea, in 2019, we had 11 different groups come in to work with us between evangelism, construction, and different things. And then around the world, we started to hear the stories, the wave of illness that was going to come, or a lot of cases we heard misinformation. And the world just started to turn upside down. And I don't think any of us anywhere in the world had a clue what was going to happen. Suddenly, we were all in uncharted territory. We had to learn new habits, new ways of doing things. Heck, even we had to learn new slogans. Now you got it. And me personally, I went into full panic mode. On a personal level, health-wise, and financially. You see, by nature, I'm a planner. I'm a strategist. I have an innate ability to project likely outcomes and to identify trends. So I was panicking on a couple levels. Here there's this virus they're saying that affects people with pre-existing conditions, and I'm fat and I have high blood pressure. And nobody knows how it spreads, and nobody knows how long it lasts or how long it lives on services. So, like, Patty and I went through maybe what some of you have been through. We started disinfecting everything. Fruits, vegetables, our hands, our feet. I mean, when we went out, the second we came back in the door, we dropped our clothes right there and headed for the shower and a change and kind of just, washed everything. I mean, we went all out. It was so bad that when I wanted to get into bed at night, Patty was breaking out the Clorox wipes before she'd let me. Not necessarily a bad idea, even in the normal times. And when Bogota shut down, and it shut down totally, where we couldn't even work or leave the house, it felt like I was heading out into a war zone every time that I needed to get groceries. We were scared, and it was not even so much about the virus. We were scared about the unknown and the unknowable. And then there was me, the planner, without a plan. And I started to panic. Not because of lacking a plan, and not having a plan did really turn me upside down, but because I was looking at the trends. The churches that have been our main source of donations were having to close. They couldn't have services. And I was pretty sure that soon we were going to be cut off. And we were going to be trapped in a foreign country with no way to support my family. I was freaked out. Like Peter, I forgot about everything that Jesus did before, and I was just wondering how we were going to survive. And yet, in that, God spoke. While I was worrying about the circumstances, he challenged me. He said, Darren, am I really God or not? Am I really a miracle worker or not? Can I provide miraculously or not? You've been talking to me about me all my life, that I can do all these things, but now the moment when the rubber hits the road, are you really willing to trust me? And we saw all the people around us who were starting to go hungry, and he reminded what Jesus said, for I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. So we decided to believe that God really was a God of miracles, and we would put him to the test. In the middle of famine, we began to give out food packages to those who were unable to work in a country with no social safety net. And what we thought was just going to be a few weeks and a few dozen food packages turned out to be 9 months and almost 2,000 people, 2,000 families that were given just the basics to be able to eat. And that brought to us relief into our hearts and minds, because it gave us a measure of confidence that God really was going to take care of us, even in the worst circumstances, and maybe even a little bit of complacency. We started to see God move in ways that we had never imagined. In spite of being moved from country to country, from Colombia to Canada and back to Colombia, we saw his provision, and we were able to rejoice in trust in him, even when we ourselves last year lost $25,000 of our support. In the middle of chaos, we were concerned but content. We were able to even move our building projects forward. The boys' home that we've adopted, that we started working on an expansion, we were able to, within a couple months, return to work and put the cement slab across the first floor there, and put several of the local people to work. And then we felt God was moving us to build a Sunday school for a church in Buena Vista, this little one-room church that we showed you the last time we were here. And all of a sudden, one person gave us just this little gift, and within a few weeks we found not only that we had enough to start, but we had enough to do the entire building. So now this one-room church looks like this. And the entire second floor that's going to be their Sunday school is built. Now they're just working right now on windows and some of the finishing work. And they've even put in a partial third floor slab at the back so they can add an apartment to it. That part they're paying for by themselves. And the church sanctuary that looked like this is now this. And as we speak, that little church in Nokaima that you saw that's on a hilltop, well, half of that is a prefab structure. And it was falling apart. It was pastor's parsonage. And as we speak, it's been torn down, that old prefab, and it's now starting to be rebuilt, which will double the size of their sanctuary. And it has a half cement slab going on the top of it, so that old prefab structure, we can rebuild it on the second floor as a parsonage. We're doubling the size of the congregation, and we're doing all this in a pandemic where there's really supposedly not a lot of resources. And remember what I said a minute ago about us losing $25,000 in support? That was very true. We did. We had different churches that dropped out, individuals that had to drop out. By the way, Kingsville Community Church never dropped out. Kingsville Community Church says, we will turn off the lights before we stop your support. God bless you. But by year's end, we had more money in our ministry account than when we started. And that's how our year went, up and down and all around. And seeing God being faithful, even in October when we returned to Bogota and the pandemic was raging, we were cautious, but not overly concerned. God is good, and he was showing himself in really big ways. Then Jade died. On November 3rd, Jade died, and our personal glue started to come apart. That day, we encountered death in a very personal way. It wasn't like death in the news reports. Yeah, it was far away. She died in Tanzania, where she served with her husband and 3 boys, leading the village of Hope in Tanzania. And she didn't die from COVID. At age 32, she had a sudden stroke. But this death was one of ours. A missionary, a 32-year-old parent, and Patty and I, we were devastated. See, at that point, part of us was in denial. We weren't taking care of ourselves inside like we should. We were internalizing our stress. And we had heard about people, friends in our Colombian circles that had passed away, pastors that we'd not seen in a long time, friends of friends. But like all the rest of COVID, it was all so unreal. And we could write it off as people that were just being unlucky or not being careful. But with Jade even being far away, our own illusions of invincibility seemed to be stripped away. We suddenly felt vulnerable, and we ached for for her 3 young children that lost their mother. But all the while, Patty and I were thinking, well, maybe our boys aren't as protected as we thought. All of a sudden, all the pain and loss and doubt and our humanity came down, crashing down on us. And yet here we were in the middle of our busiest time of the year, prepping food and Christmas presents for hundreds of waiting hands, and all we wanted to do was roll up in our blankets, drown ourselves in comfort food, and hide from the world. Then Pastor Tom saved Christmas. I say it tongue-in-cheek, but Pastor Tom really did save Christmas. See, our friend Renata Walton, who most of you know, director of the Village of Hope in Malawi, she was very close to Jade. And Renata, like us, was in a position of her busiest time of year where she had hundreds of happy little children reaching out, picking up their provisions, and yet she just wanted to crawl into a corner and cry. And she shared her struggle on Facebook, saying that she just was going through the motions. And Pastor Tom responded to her, and the wisdom he shared touched us deeply as well. And he said, "Let me encourage you, Renata. You cry and rejoice sometimes in the same breath. It's a burden that we carry as pastors and the price that we own for loving people. Today, take your time and rejoice with those who rejoice. And allow your heart to break and weep with the brokenhearted. Like Jesus, you enter into others' humanity." That wise counsel gave us permission to grieve and to celebrate at the same time. It saved us, helped us, restore us, and gave us the strength that we needed to get through that season. It allowed us to understand Paul's admonition in Romans 12:15 in a new way when he said, "Rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those that mourn." It had never occurred to me that you could do both simultaneously. And Christmas, well, Christmas was amazing. In spite of heavy hearts, we were able to be the hands and feet of Jesus to thousands of children across the country. Again, in that crazy pandemic year where money was tight for so many, where we lost so much of our own monthly support, God provided, and we were one of the only programs last year that ran a Christmas blessing presentations or program for kids. And more than just presents, we were able to feed dozens of families who didn't even have rice for their Christmas meal. And I can't really tell you if we got our relationship with Jesus back right then, but we did get back our religion. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, is to look after orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. And there's a lot in this world that can pollute us right now. So we looked after folks, and we were able to bless hundreds of children with a Christmas present from Jesus. We continued to see God move through us even when we ourselves were just emotionally wrung out. And for a little while longer, we were able to keep from being polluted by the world around us. We were holding down the fort, and we were even starting to think that, hey, maybe I really am stronger than I thought. And there was days I was just saying to myself, I don't know how much longer I can hold out. And then we lost Karina. When I first arrived in Bogota 26 years ago, I was kind of taken under the wing of, there we go. Taken under the wing of this man, Angel, and his wife, Pilar, that are not pictured. I was a 28-year-old lost teenager, you could say. Arrived in Bogota the first time on a short-term trip. I had no idea why I was there other than to see something of what Jesus was doing in the world. Had nobody, knew no one. And their little family with their two daughters, Joanna and Karina, took me under their wing. And for those of you who know me, I have a thing with kids. I love kids. I am a big kid, and they understand me. Children that will not go close to anybody else will come to me, and at the most it might cost me a couple fruit caramels to make it happen. I love hugging, playing, tickling, winding them up, sending them home to their parents, really hyperactive. That's my special blessing. And it's funny because I will have children that I met 15 and 20 years ago that are adults, and they still come and they say, "No, Darren, we could never forget you. You loved us." And I think Karina and Johanna were part of my survival in those first few weeks, as I knew nothing about my situation, I was in a country that I didn't know, a language I barely spoke. And then in February, Angel calls me. And Angel, he was just moved back to the U.S. after being to Colombia after being in the U.S. for 20 years. Let's just say his legal situation was not exactly clear, so he couldn't go back to the States even if he wanted to. And he said, Darren, Karina's sick. She has COVID, and they don't think that she's going to make it through the night. And so we had people praying for her. And she's one of those wonderful young women that everybody loves. And the next morning, she died alone in a hospital in Florida. Any child that I have ever played with is one of my kids. And that morning, I lost one of my little girls. And I really wish that I could say Karina was the only one that we lost, but she wasn't the first or even the 10th. She's one of at least 24 people we've lost, mostly to COVID. When I say 24, actually, I can't even tell you, we honestly lost count. Like I said, when you know a lot of people, then you see so much more joy, but so much more suffering. The last couple weeks before we came up, there was not one day that we didn't hear about somebody in our ministerial circle that wasn't dying, that hadn't died. Right after Karina, another missionary friend died, and I walked alongside his wife as she laid in a coma attached to a respirator for weeks before she was medevaced to Canada. And even when she got back here, even when she woke up, she was in a semi-vegetative state for weeks. We didn't think we'd ever get her back before God brought her back. And Colombia is still in a lot of trouble. Just a couple days ago, our case counts hit 33,000 daily. Half of them in Bogota. 4 of them are one of Patty's sisters, her husband, and our 2 little nieces. In fact, we have 12 people in 3 families right now that are sick. And in Colombia, close to 700 people are dying daily. To give you maybe a point of comparison, and I in no way want to take away from the tragedy that's happening in India, but if you do the math, our case counts in Colombia right now, our daily deaths are 3 times higher than India per capita. It's really been a tough decade this year. Now, please understand, I'm not sharing all of this looking for sympathy or to complain. But we would love your prayers and maybe just a little bit of compassion. But not just for us, for everybody around you, for your friends, your family, your neighbors, and especially for your leaders like Pastor Tom and Katie and Cole and their families. See, you didn't know most of what Patty and I have been living through. In the same way, you don't know what your leaders have been going through. You don't know what your friends are going through behind the scenes. As you open up the community center, you don't know what the people that are coming in those doors are going through. You see, we really need to learn to give grace to those around us as we all recover from what some have dubbed a worldwide trauma event. To quote the Apostle John, "Dear friends, let us love one another. For love comes from God, and everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever doesn't love doesn't know God, because God is love." And lately, some of us seem to have forgotten what love is. put on Facebook the other night, some of us are so concerned about being right that we've forgotten what our opinions, the pain it causes, and the perceptions of others. Over the last year and a half, Patty and I have seen God move in some amazing ways. In spite of us, in spite of our fears, but there have been also times when we've been beat down. And it has been in those times that God has brought us back to the foundation of our faith. In my case, a place that I first encountered as a teenager, doubting his faith, a place that the Apostle Peter also came to. Peter, when he came to this place, it was a rough time for Jesus. People were upset with him. He had just been teaching some profound truths about his body, about his blood. But most of the disciples didn't like what he had to say. Go figure. They didn't agree with what God had to say. So they walked away. They were convinced they were right, and they left Jesus there only with his closest followers. And Jesus posed a question to the 12. Now, I don't think that the 12 even agreed with Jesus. Heck, I don't even think they understood what Jesus was teaching. But when Jesus asked the question, Peter had the only possible answer. Because Jesus asked the 12, he says, "Are you guys leaving too?" And Peter answered him, "Lord, to whom else would we go? You are the only one who has the words of eternal life." And that's been our answer as a family, as a ministry, our answer to a difficult season. Where else would we go? Who else has the words of eternal life? Who else has hope? Who else can give us an eternal future? It's a good place to be in. Rock bottom, where you look up at the sky and say, "God, I've got nowhere else to go. You're my only answer." It's a good place because you fully realize that there isn't any other real or viable option. But God didn't leave us there. But like with Elijah in 1 Kings 19, when we needed it most, he took us to an oasis. I'll give you a backdrop. In 2013, we were living here in Kingsville as we went back and forth to Columbia. But we were getting ready to relaunch into ministry, and to do that, we had to raise a certain amount of money before we left. And Pastor Tom can tell you, I spent almost 2 years running across the province, staying in flea bag hotels, crying myself to sleep a lot of nights because I thought we were at the point where we were not going to get back. And I was at a conference for pastors and missionaries, and there was a minister that was speaking. He told about his own rough patch, how he'd had a nervous breakdown, how he had been taken out of ministry in spite of being a superintendent in the Assemblies of God in the U.S. But in that message, he told a story about a missionary in the southern U.S. that started a ministry called Hillcrest Children's Ministries in I think it was the early 20s. And when she was going to start the ministry, people time after time would ask her, "Well, how are you going to pay for all this? You're going to be caring for dozens and hundreds of kids. How are you going to pay for it?" And she finally got a little frustrated one day, and she reached into her pocket and she grabbed a coin, the only coin that she had, and she said, "I have God and I have one thin dime." Today, Hillcrest Children's Ministry has a massive campus, has touched tens of thousands of people over the years, and it started with God and one thin dime. And us, who were at that time about to quit, felt encouraged, and all of a sudden the doors started opening and our support started going up. But then we all sort of started having something really curious happen, and my kids can tell you this. All of a sudden we had dimes starting to appear all over the place. We would wash our clothes and a dime would be in the washer. Never a penny, a quarter, a nickel, never $100 bills. always a dime. We would go walking down the street, and we would find a dime. We would find dimes in the weirdest places. Even when we made it back to Bogota for the first 6 months, we were there, and I have the collection. We had got rid of all of our Canadian money before we left, but we found dimes. I have half a dozen dimes we found in those 6 months. And then we started finding 50 peso coins, the new ones in Colombia, and they are the size and color of a dime, and they even have a picture of a bear on it that looks like a Canadian polar bear. It just has become a symbol of us, and every once in a while, we will find dimes in the weirdest places, and it's just like, our boys will even come and say, "Hey, Dad, here's another dime. God still has our back." Well, back in February, Patty and I were at our wits' end, and we were saying, you know what, we need a vacation from COVID. And they realized that place doesn't really exist. But we were even planning, okay, we're going to get away to like this little vacation spot outside of Bogota, about an hour and a half, and hide in a cabin for a few days. But all of a sudden, we got a Facebook message from somebody that we hadn't talked to in 15 years. Matter of fact, we only met him once. And when we asked if they wanted to keep in touch or hear what was going on, we put them on our mailing list. And as I often tell people, there's only 3 ways to get off our mailing list, and one of them involves death. 15 years later, they reached out and said, "Darren, we have some miles with American that are about to expire. We'd like to give you 2 tickets to go anywhere you want to go in North America." And our first thought, of course, was Canada, but it was kind of trying to figure, why would God offer us these 2 free tickets? Because we've got like thousands of dollars of COVID credit with Air Canada. We don't need tickets. And then a few weeks later, we were working on getting some money. I can't name it on with the live feed being on. Arranging to smuggle some money to a very small, not so democratic island in the Caribbean. And one of the people we met there was from Dallas, Texas, and he just mentioned, "Oh yeah, it was a few weeks ago we were vaccinated." And I don't know what you think about vaccines, and whatever you think is fine. But again, I'm fat, I have high blood pressure, and I live in a really nasty area when it comes to COVID. So the thought of vaccines are very comforting to us. And and if we grow a 3rd ear, well, just amputate it and move on with life. I figure I got worse odds of being mutated from all the Big Macs I've eaten over the years. Anyway, so and they said, anybody can get vaccinated. And in Colombia, their vaccines are just now starting to become widely available, and the most prevalent one is a Chinese Chinese vaccine that we're not terribly thrilled with ourselves. But he mentioned that, and then we called somebody. Our first ever outreach team was from San Antonio, Texas. And we called one of our friends there, and he says, "Oh yeah, you should come up. And our guest house is open. You can stay there for the month." Now, understand that this man is an ophthalmic surgeon. He's not one of our supporters, probably never has, but he's a good friend. And he has just this little $3 million mansion with a pool and jacuzzi on top of a hill in San Antonio with a guest house and like this massive 3-car garage. The second floor of it is like a games room and has extra beds. And so we suffered for Jesus because we found ourselves on a plane and we had our own little oasis for him. But God, knowing what we needed, he took us and opened up an oasis experience. Now, why did I tell you about the dimes? It's because the only thing that we paid for on that trip was 1 ticket and the rental car. And we picked up the rental car, and as I'm picking up, I'm filling up with gas, just kind of cleaning out a little bit because it was down. And what did I find in the rental car? The only thing I found in a rental car? A dime. We got to the guest house. I'm setting up on my desk, and there's 1 coin on the desk, and what was it? God was saying to you, "I took care of your rental car. I provided your place to stay. This trip is from me. This is my gift to you. I still have your back. We still love you. I still love you, and then I will still take care of you." He took us to the oasis. He fed us. He cared for us, and he allowed us to rest. Some of you guys need to spend some oasis time to reconnect with God, to be pampered by him. But like with Elijah, you also need to have your perspective and your priorities reordered. And you may find yourself in a desert, but it doesn't mean you need to stay there. Earlier we sang the song, "Blessed be your name," and we need to do that. We need to bless his name when the streams of abundance flow, and we need to bless his name when we're in the wilderness. And we especially need to bless his name when we're in that weird, strange, unknown place where both seem to happen simultaneously. There's too many people that have been white-knuckling it, just trying to hang on until the world gets back to normal. Well, let me tell you, the world never has been normal. Ever since the Garden of Eden, the world's been one mess after another, and the only constant, unmovable, unshakable, and unstoppable has been God. In the beginning was the Word, and maybe that's where we need to start, not with our opinions, our fears, or our speculations, but with the truth that can only be found in a loving God. And if you ask, like we asked, when things get rough, he's ready and willing to bring you through the storm, to heal you, to restore you, and bring you back to strength. And some of you might be sitting here and think, well, Darren, this hasn't been a difficult season for me. Oh yeah, it's been a pain with the regulations. Yeah, it's been a pain with the lockdowns. I don't think we need a lot of this stuff. And that's your reality, and that's a wonderful reality. But in the same way, you didn't know what we were going through over this last year and a half until I just told you. You don't know what your friends are going through behind the scenes. You don't know what's going on in your community. And the strength that you have, they desperately need. And they need your love and your understanding and your grace. And there's been far too much of a lack of grace in our church in the last couple of years. And if you learn any one lesson from the struggle that we've gone through this morning, learn this: that it doesn't matter how bad your own circumstances are, there's never a time with God that you cannot bless others. Again, I want to thank the church this morning for being behind us in all of this, for being steady when others weren't being steady, for not giving us 2 weeks of casseroles. And when we go back in August, we will go back with you, and we hope that we can go back with your prayers and your partnership as always.
You're watching on television this morning, or you're watching over the stream, or you're here in person. And maybe just take a few moments, close your eyes and ask, have I become disconnected from my hope? Have I become disconnected from my faith? And is there just so much stuff that's gotten in the way of that pure and simple devotion of following Jesus and learning from him? And Lord, I pray, just as you put dimes in Darren's pathway to show him you were still there and you're his provider, Lord, that in the same way we would have those things in our lives that would show us those touchstone little things that speak huge volumes to us. Lord, that there is no greater place that we could place our hope than in you. There's no greater place that we could be in our lives than close to you. And if you're not in that place today, you can be, and just open your life and say, Jesus, I place my hope in you. I make that recommitment and reconnection to you. And I'm going to go back. I'm going to start with the Word. I'm going to get back into the Word. I'm going to pray. I'm going to read every day. I'm going to pray every day. Get into the New Testament. Lord, I want to reestablish that relationship. I want to get back to where I want to be, where I once was with you. And so make that commitment to Christ right now. Only you can make it, and only you can keep it. But reconnect with him. Maybe that's reconnecting with your church. Maybe that's reconnecting with a friend. Maybe that's reconnecting with your Bible or reconnecting with prayer. I don't know, but I know that God will give you a dime to tell you and let you know that he's there and he hasn't forsaken you. And then maybe what you need to do is you need to go out and you need to put love into action. That's a theme of our church. That's like our vision. We want to put love into action. And no matter what you're going through, you can put love into action right where you are. So, Lord, I pray that you show us how to put love into action in somebody's life today and this week for Jesus' glory. And everybody said, amen.